talking about this.
Bill said, if you are born poor, it's not your mistake, but if you die poor, it's your mistake. Warren Buffett also said, if you don't find a way to make money while you sleep, you will work until you die. Today's video is about Ramzi Musallam, a self-made billionaire, and the CEO of Veritas Capital, who is currently worth over $4 billion from the starting point of zero. This is how his life started. Ramzi's father, Sami Musallam, a Palestinian Christian born in Jerusalem, landed in New York City in late 1950, shortly after the First Arab-Israeli War in 1948. All his belongings were stolen his first night at the Young Men's Christian Association known as YMCA. He persevered, eventually earning a civil engineering degree from the University of Missouri before settling and prospering in Illinois. By the mid-1960s, Sami returned to the Middle East, where his second son, Ramzi, was born in 1968 in Amman, Jordan. Sami Musallam worked for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, moving his family constantly. Ramzi's formative years were spent in emerging markets such as Saudi Arabia and Tanzania. He once said, while living in Africa we were literally in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing there, no village, nothing. We were homeschooled and learned through correspondence. There was no iPad. We would do an assignment, and my mom would mail it in. By the time Ramzi was in high school, his family returned to the U.S. and landed in Pine Brook, New Jersey. He studied economics at Colgate University and started on Wall Street as a J.P. Morgan investment banker in 1990 before jumping 2 years later into private equity at a boutique firm, Berkshire Partners. He then headed to the University of Chicago for business school, where he got his master's degree, and talked himself into a job with the investment operation of J. Pritzker, the billionaire who built the Hyatt Hotels chain. When he graduated in 1997, Ramzi headed to New York, where he was hired by Robert McKeon. On September 10, 2012, while working under Robert McKeon, Ramzi Musallam returned to his desk after a quick bathroom break to find his assistant visibly shaken. She informed him that a call had come in about his boss, Robert McKeon. He had just committed suicide in his southern Connecticut mansion at the age of 58. Ramzi jumped in his car and drove 40 miles from New York to Connecticut. He was very close to McKeon and knew his boss was struggling with mental health, but never expected to take his own life. Ramzi was in shock. He said, unquote, "It was just so devastating. For as long as I had known him, we had worked together. It was tough. I had never experienced anything like this." While McKeon's American dream had soured into a nightmare, Ramzi's was about to soar. He returned to the office to devise a plan to stave off the collapse of Veritas Capital, the private equity firm McKeon had founded in 1992. Ramzi had come on board in 1997 and was Veritas' second highest-ranking executive. The morning after the suicide, Ramzi called for emergency meetings with the company's investors. McKeon's death meant they suddenly had the right to tear up their commitments to fund Veritas deals. Instead, Ramzi convinced everyone to bet on him. A Veritas investor, Claudia Barron, once said about Ramzi, "He was not just dealing with the investors and the firm, he was dealing with losing someone he was close to, and he never wavered, even answering questions that were sometimes probing and personal. I thought, if that is how he acts during a stressful time, he's going to have the same level of thoughtfulness and integrity in deal work." Ramzi produced this track record by focusing on technology companies that operate in sectors dominated by the United States federal government, particularly defense, healthcare and education. America's $6.8 trillion worth of annual spending and sweeping regulatory power give it unparalleled sway in these markets. While many buyout firms try to avoid investing in areas affected by government interference, Ramzi's strategy hinges on understanding what the most influential player in the global economy will do next. These maneuvers laid the foundation for a stunning Wall Street success. Nearly a decade later, Veritas Capital's assets have grown from $2 billion in 2012 to $36 billion today, and its funds have generated staggering net internal rates of return of 31%. The funds have lost money on only a single investment, which is $87 million on a solar panel company in New Mexico, and since Ramzi took over, Veritas has distributed $12 billion to its investors. At 53, Ramzi finds himself worth an estimated $4 billion, good enough for appearance on Forbes 400. Despite his success and achievement, he rarely speaks to the press. He is one of a handful of financiers with top government security clearance. How did Ramzi Musallam went from zero to over $4 billion? We will try to explain everything if you stick with us. Before we go further, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's continue. At Veritas, McKeon owned a majority of the company and raised money on a deal-by-deal basis from a network of CEOs, including Chevron's George Keller and Ford's Harold Red Poling. His only partner was Thomas Campbell, a fellow banker, who had left Wasserstein Perella with him to start Veritas, and who McKeon would shove out the door in 2007. Ramzi changed McKeon's tactics and bring in two new directions. First, he convinced McKeon to move beyond his deal-by-deal approach and raise private equity funds from institutional investors that would lock up cash for years. That gave them flexibility and helped the business grow. Second, Ramzi figured out that defense contractors would be fertile buyout targets for funds willing to deal with the idiosyncrasies of government contracting. Starting with the purchase of PEI Electronics, a Huntsville, Alabama-based military equipment maker, Veritas cobbled together what would become Integrated Defense Technologies, which it listed on the New York Stock Exchange in 2002. Defense deals would become Veritas' bread and butter. When one looked particularly promising, McKeon would take a cue from Bruce Wasserstein and grab more of the riches for himself. He personally made $350 million just from DynCorp, a military contractor that was sold in 2010. McKeon's death tripped Veritas' key person provision, giving the firm's investors the right to stop providing capital for new deals. Had enough of those investors walk away, it would have destroyed the firm. Ramzi had 6 months to get through the key person process before the investor spigot turned off. Ramzi started traveling across America to meet with Veritas investors, ultimately convincing every one of them to stick with him and his team, partly by cutting Veritas management fees. At the same time, Ramzi had to persuade McKeon's estate, controlled by one of his brothers, and established for the benefit of his 4 children, to transfer McKeon's Veritas ownership to him. Absent Ramzi's efforts to get investor buy-ins, the whole firm would have collapsed, so his negotiating position with the family was strong. By January 2013, McKeon's family agreed to transfer ownership of Veritas in exchange for 10% of the proceeds of any future sale of its management company and the 3 general partnerships associated with its existing funds. They also retained a reduced portion of McKeon's performance fees from existing Veritas funds and 5% of the performance fees for the next 2 funds Veritas raised. It was a complete victory for Ramzi. The firm would remain in business with him as its majority owner and CEO. For years, Ramzi was obsessed with the digitization of health records. He was first turned on to the idea of a government-private sector partnership involving healthcare IT through conversations with Kerry Weems, who headed Medicare in George W. Bush's administration. Ramzi made a habit of staying close to people like Weems, who controlled one of the largest budgets in the U.S. government. Veritas would dip its toe into these waters in 2007 by buying its first healthcare IT services firm, Van Gent. It would sell the company to General Dynamics 4 years later for a $350 million profit. In 2012, Ramzi approached information giant Thomson Reuters about buying the businesses it had cobbled together to provide data on insurance claims and healthcare expenditures to hospitals and insurance companies. Ramzi was certain that Veritas needed to go big on healthcare data, and after putting up $465 million, Veritas was able to acquire the group in a $1.3 billion leveraged buyout, making it one of the firm's largest bets. Ramzi renamed the Thomson Reuters unit to Troven Health Analytics and initiated $165 million of new capital expenditures to help transform the company from a mere data provider into a business that could help customers learn how to provide better care while reducing costs and waste. To speed things along, Troven was paired with a defense intelligence software company Veritas had purchased from Lockheed Martin that had already developed efficient algorithms to analyze petabytes of data. "We make our companies collaborate," Ramzi says. "It's not a nice thing to do, it's a requirement." Ramzi pivoted Troven toward the public sector. It began selling its services to government customers such as Medicare for the first time. In 2016, Troven sold to IBM for $2.6 billion, making Veritas 3.2 times its original investment. Veritas is the rare government-focused buyout shop that does not hire prominent former politicians or government officials. Instead, Ramzi prefers to tap into decades of relationships. He spends a lot of time sitting through briefings in sensitive compartmented information facilities set up by the military, for which top security clearances are required and mobile phones are banned. Ramzi has kept one foot firmly in the defense arena. In 2015, Veritas, together with some co-investors, put down $845 million to buy flailing aerospace repair company Standard Aero from Dubai Aerospace in a $2.1 billion deal. Ramzi had just raised $1.9 billion for Veritas' first new fund under his watch and wagered a big chunk of it on the Scottsdale, Arizona company. Standard Aero quickly expanded in Europe and Asia. Having developed a way to trim the time required to repair jet engines, it was soon winning new government contracts. In 2019, Ramzi sold Standard Aero to Carlyle Group for $5.3 billion, more than tripling Veritas' initial investment. If you want to be one of these people, eventually becoming a billionaire is not something impossible, is not a rocket science, and you don't need a magic to produce the result. In fact, the formula for it is so simple that anyone can do it. There is no shortcut to it. The easiest formula for it is to wake up early, work hard, never give up, never stop believing, never stop trying. Your days are certainly marked along the way. The happiest moment in life happen when you have the courage to move forward. You must make the choice to take the chance if you want anything in life to change.